Chapter 1 of Cape Gloucester, The Green Inferno. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Cape Gloucester, The Green Inferno by Bernard C. Nolte. On the early morning of 26 December 1943, Marines poised off the coast of Japanese-held New Britain could barely make out the mile-high bulk of Mount Talawe against a sky growing light with the approach of dawn. Flame billowed from the guns of American and Australian cruisers and destroyers, shattering the early morning calm. The men of the 1st Marine Division, commanded by Major General William H. Rupertus, a veteran of expeditionary duty in Haiti and China and of the recently concluded Guadalcanal campaign, steeled themselves as they waited for daylight and the signal to assault the yellow beaches near Cape Gloucester in the northwestern part of the island. For 90 minutes, the fire support ships blazed away, trying to neutralize whole areas rather than destroy pinpoint targets, since dense jungle concealed most of the individual fortifications and supply dumps. After the day dawned and H-hour drew near, Army airmen joined the preliminary bombardment. 4-engine consolidated Liberator B-24 bombers, flying so high that the Marines offshore could barely see them, dropped 500-pound bombs inland of the beaches, scoring a hit on a fuel dump at the Cape Gloucester airfield complex and igniting a fiery geyser that leapt hundreds of feet into the air. Twin-engine North American Mitchell B-25 medium bombers and Douglas Havoc A-20 light bombers, attacking from lower altitude, pounced on the only Japanese anti-aircraft gun rash enough to open fire. The warships then shifted their attention to the assault beaches, and the landing craft carrying the 2 battalions of Colonel Julian N. Frisbee's 7th Marines started shoreward. An LCI, Landing Craft Infantry, mounting multiple rocket launchers, took position on the flank of the first wave bound for each of the 2 beaches and unleashed a barrage intended to keep the enemy pinned down after the cruisers and destroyers shifted their fire to avoid endangering the assault troops. At 0746, the LCVPs, Landing Craft, Vehicles, and Personnel, of the first wave bound for Yellow Beach 1 grounded on a narrow strip of black sand that measured perhaps 500 yards from one flank to the other, and the leading elements of the 3rd Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel William K. Williams, started inland. 2 minutes later, Lieutenant Colonel John E. Weber's 1st Battalion, on the left of the other unit, emerged on Yellow Beach 2, separated from Yellow 1 by 1,000 yards of jungle and embracing 700 yards of shoreline. Neither battalion encountered organized resistance. A smokescreen, which later drifted across the beaches and hampered the approach of later waves of landing craft, blinded the Japanese observers on Target Hill overlooking the beachhead, and no defenders manned the trenches and log and earth bunkers that might have raked the assault force with fire. The Yellow Beaches, on the east coast of the broad peninsula that culminated at Cape Gloucester, provided access to the main objective, the 2 airfields at the northern tip of the Cape. By capturing this airfield complex, the reinforced 1st Marine Division, designated the Backhander Task Force, would enable Allied airmen to intensify their attack on the Japanese fortress of Rabaul, roughly 300 miles away at the northeastern extremity of New Britain. Although the capture of the Yellow Beaches held the key to the New Britain campaign, 2 subsidiary landings also took place. The first on 15 December at Cape Mercus on ROA Bay along the south coast, and the second on D-Day, 26 December, at Green Beach on the northwest coast opposite the main landing sites. 2 secondary landings. The first subsidiary landing took place on 15 December 1943 at distant Cape Mercus, across the ROA Channel from the islet of ROA. Although it had a limited purpose, disrupting the movement of motorized barges and other small craft that moved men and supplies along the southern coast of New Britain and diverting attention from Cape Gloucester, It nevertheless encountered stiff resistance. Marine amphibian tractor crews used both the new, armored Buffalo and older, slower, and more vulnerable Alligator to carry soldiers of the 112th Cavalry, who made the main landings on Orange Beach at the western edge of Cape Mercus. Fire from the destroyer USS Cunningham, supplemented by rocket-equipped DUKWs and a submarine chaser that doubled as a control craft, and a last-minute bombing by B-25s silenced the beach defenses and enabled the Buffaloes to crush the surviving Japanese machine guns that survived the naval and aerial bombardment. Less successful were two diversionary landings by soldiers paddling ashore in rubber boats. Savage fire forced one group to turn back short of its objective east of Orange Beach, but the other gained a lodgment on Pilelo Island and killed the handful of Japanese found there. An enemy airman had reported that the assault force was approaching Cape Mercus, and the fighters and bombers from Rabaul attacked within 2 hours of the landing. Sporadic airstrikes continued throughout December, although with diminishing ferocity, and the Japanese shifted troops to meet the threat in the south. The other secondary landing took place on the morning of 26 December. The 1,500-man Stoneface Group, designated Battalion Landing Team 21 and built around the 2nd Battalion 1st Marines, under Lieutenant Colonel James M. Masters, Sr., started toward Green Beach, supported by 5-inch gunfire from the American destroyers Reed and Smith. LCMs, Landing Craft Medium, carried DUKW amphibian trucks, driven by soldiers and fitted with rocket launchers. The DUKWs opened fire from the landing craft as the assault force approached the beach, performing the same function as the rocket-firing LCIs at the yellow beaches on the opposite side of the peninsula. The first wave landed at 0748, with two others following it ashore. The Marines encountered no opposition as they carved out a beachhead 1,200 yards wide and extending 500 yards inland. The Stoneface Group had the mission of severing the coastal trail that passed just west of Mount Talloway, thus preventing the passage of reinforcements to the Cape Gloucester airfields. The trail net proved difficult to find and follow. Villagers cleared garden plots, tilled them until the jungle reclaimed them, and then abandoned the land and moved on, leaving a maze of trails, some faint and others fresh, that led nowhere. The Japanese were slow, however, to take advantage of the confusion caused by the tangle of paths. Not until the early hours of 30 December did the enemy attack the Green Beach force. Taking advantage of heavy rain that muffled sounds and reduced visibility, the Japanese closed with the Marines, who called down mortar fire within 15 yards of their defensive wire. A battery of the 11th Marines, reorganized as an infantry unit because the cannoneers could not find suitable position for their 75mm howitzers, shored up the defenses. One Marine in particular, Gunnery Sergeant Giuseppe Gilano Jr., seemed to materialize at critical moments, firing a light machine gun from the hip. His heroism earned him the Navy Cross. Some of the Japanese succeeded in penetrating the position, but a counterattack led by First Lieutenant Jim G. Paulos of Company G killed them or drove them off. The savage fighting cost Combat Team 21 6 Marines killed and 17 wounded. At least 89 Japanese perished and 5 surrendered. On 11 January 1944, the reinforced battalion set out to rejoin the division, the troops moving overland, the heavy equipment and the wounded traveling in landing craft. MacArthur's Marines. After the fierce battles at Guadalcanal in the South Pacific area, the 1st Marine Division underwent a rehabilitation in Australia, which lay within General MacArthur's Southwest Pacific area. Once the division had recovered from the ordeal of the Solomon Islands fighting, it gave MacArthur a trained amphibious unit that he desperately needed to fulfill his ambitions for the capture of Rabaul. Theoretically, the 1st Marine Division was subordinate to General Sir Thomas Blamey, the Australian officer in command of the Allied land forces, and Blamey's nominal subordinate, Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, commanding the 6th U.S. Army. But in actual practice, MacArthur bypassed Blamey and dealt directly with Kruger. When the 1st Marine Division became available to MacArthur, he still intended to seize Rabaul and break the back of Japanese resistance in the region. Always concerned about air cover for his amphibious operations, MacArthur planned to use the Marines to capture the airfields at Cape Gloucester. Aircraft based there would then support the division when, after a brief period of recuperation, it attacked Rabaul. The decision to bypass Rabaul eliminated the landings there, but the Marines would nevertheless seize the Cape Gloucester airfields, which seemed essential for neutralizing the base. The initial concept of operations, which called for the conquest of western New Britain preliminary to storming Rabaul, split the 1st Marine Division, sending Combat Team A, the 5th Marines, reinforced, less 1 battalion in reserve, against Gazmata on the southern coast of the island, while Combat Team C, the 7th Marines, reinforced, seized a beachhead near the principal objective, the airfields on Cape Gloucester. The Army's 503rd Parachute Infantry would exploit the Cape Gloucester beachhead, while Combat Team B, the reinforced 1st Marines, provided a reserve for the operation. Revisions came swiftly, and by late October 1943, the plan no longer mentioned capturing Rabaul, tacit acceptance of the modified Allied strategy, and also satisfied an objection raised by General Rupertus. The division commander had protested splitting Combat Team C, and Kruger agreed to employ all 3 battalions for the main assault, substituting a battalion from Combat Team B, the 1st Marines, for the landing on the west coast. The airborne landing at Cape Gloucester remained in the plan, however, even though Rupertus had warned that bad weather could delay the drop and jeopardize the Marine battalions already fighting there. The altered version earmarked Army troops for the landing on the southern coast, which Kruger's staff shifted from Gazmata to Arway, a site closer to Allied airfields and farther from Rabaul with its troops and aircraft. Although Combat Team B would put 1 battalion ashore southwest of the airfields, the remaining 2 battalions of the 1st Marines were to follow up the assault on Cape Gloucester by Combat Team C. The Division Reserve, Combat Team A, might employ elements of the 5th Marines to reinforce the Cape Gloucester landings or conduct operations against the offshore islands west of New Britain. During a routine briefing on 14 December, just 1 day before the landings at Arway, MacArthur offhandedly asked how the Marines felt about the scheme of maneuver at Cape Gloucester. Colonel Edwin A. Pollock, the division operations officer, seized the opportunity and declared that the Marines objected to the plan because it depended on a rapid advance inland by a single reinforced regiment to prevent heavy losses among the lightly armed paratroopers. Better, he believed, to strengthen the amphibious forces than to try for an aerial envelopment that might fail or be delayed by the weather. Although he made no comment at the time, MacArthur may well have heeded what Pollock said. Whatever the reason, Kruger's staff eliminated the airborne portion, directed the 2 battalions of the 1st Marines still with Combat Team B to land immediately after the assault waves, sustaining the momentum of their attack, and alerted the Division Reserve to provide further reinforcement. Sidebars. Major General William H. Rupertus. Major General William H. Rupertus, who commanded the 1st Marine Division on New Britain, was born at Washington, D.C. on 14 November 1889 and in June 1913 graduated from the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service School of Instruction. Instead of pursuing a career in this precursor of the U.S. Coast Guard, he accepted appointment as a 2nd lieutenant in the Marine Corps. A vigorous advocate of rifle marksmanship throughout his career, he became a member of the Marine Corps Rifle Team in 1915, 2 years after entering the service, and won 2 major matches. During World War I, he commanded the Marine detachment on the USS Florida, assigned to the British Grand Fleet. Between the World Wars, he served in a variety of assignments. In 1919, he joined the Provisional Marine Brigade at Port-au-Prince, Haiti, subsequently becoming Inspector of Constabulary with the Marine Trained Gendarmerie and finally Chief of the Port-au-Prince Police Force. Rupertus graduated in June 1926 from the Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and in January of the following year became Inspector of Target Practice for the Marine Corps. He had 2 tours of duty in China and commanded a battalion of the 4th Marines in Shanghai when the Japanese attacked the city's Chinese defenders in 1937. During the Guadalcanal campaign, as a brigadier general, he was Assistant Division Commander, 1st Marine Division, personally selected for the post by Major General Alexander A. Vandergrift, the division commander, whom he succeeded when Vandergrift left the division in July 1943. Major General Rupertus led the division on New Britain and at Peleliu. He died of a heart attack at Washington, D.C. on 25 March 1945 and did not see the surrender of Japan, which he had done so much to bring about. The Fortress of Rabaul. Located on Simpson Harbor at the northeastern tip of New Britain, Rabaul served as an air and naval base and troop staging area for Japanese conquests in New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. As the advancing Japanese approached New Britain, Australian authorities, who administered the former German colony under terms of a mandate from the League of Nations, evacuated the Australian women and children living there. These dependents had already departed when the enemy landed on 23 January 1942, capturing Rabaul by routing the defenders, some of whom escaped into the jungle to become coast watchers providing intelligence for the Allies. The Australian coast watchers, many of them former planters or pre-war administrators, reported by radio on Japanese strength and movements before the invasion and afterward attached themselves to the Marines, sometimes recruiting guides and bearers from among the native populace. Once the enemy had seized Rabaul, he set to work converting it into a major installation, improving harbor facilities, building airfields and barracks, and bringing in hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sailors, and airmen, who either passed through the base en route to operations elsewhere or stayed there to defend it. Rabaul thus became the dominant objective of General Douglas MacArthur, who escaped from the Philippines in March 1942 and assumed command of the Southwest Pacific area. MacArthur proposed a 2-pronged advance on the fortress, bombing it from the air while amphibious forces closed in by way of eastern New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. Even as the Allies began closing the pincers on Rabaul, the basic strategy changed. Despite MacArthur's opposition, the American Joint Chiefs of Staff decided to bypass the stronghold, a strategy confirmed by the Anglo-American Combined Chiefs of Staff during the Quadrant Conference at Quebec in August 1943. As a result, Rabaul itself would remain in Japanese hands for the remainder of the war, though the Allies controlled the rest of New Britain. End of Chapter 1.